it hasn't been an issue for us in our many years of living tiny. There's one RV park that turned us away like 3 years ago in Portland, of all places, which is one of the most tiny friendly places now.
Welcome to the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast, the show where you learn how to plan, build, and live the tiny lifestyle. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and this is episode 177 with Alexis Stevens and Christian Parsons of Tiny House Expedition. Alexis and Christian are returning to the show. They were actually episode 12, and so much has happened since they've last been on. For one thing, they have actually been staying put in their tiny house for the last 2 years. And they are about to publish a new book, The Beginner's Guide to Tiny Houses. In this interview, we will catch up, learn about the new book and other projects that they're working on, and also talk about some of the exciting things that have been happening on the legalization front in 2021 for the tiny house movement. This is a really wide-ranging interview. Their bio says that they are like encyclopedias, and I can't agree more. They're like friendly, personable encyclopedias who know just about everything about the tiny house movement and what's happening. So definitely stick around. But before we get started, did you know that I personally send Tiny House newsletter every week on Tuesdays? It's called Tiny Tuesdays, and it's a weekly email with tiny house news, interviews, photos, and resources. It's free to subscribe, and I even share sneak peeks of things that are coming up, ask for feedback about upcoming podcast guests, and more. It's really the best place to keep a pulse on what I'm doing in the tiny house space and also stay informed of what's going on in the tiny house movement. To sign up, go to thetinyhouse.net/newsletter, where you can sign up for the Tiny Tuesdays newsletter. And of course, you can unsubscribe at any time. I will never send you spam. And if you ever don't want to receive emails, it's easy to unsubscribe. So again, that's thetinyhouse.net/newsletter. Thanks, and I hope you enjoy next week's Tiny Tuesdays newsletter. All right, I am here with Alexis Stevens and Christian Parson of Tiny House Expedition. Alexis and Christian transitioned into their DIY tiny home in 2015, and their lives have become enriched in every way possible, leading to an adventure of a lifetime. Through their extensive experience researching and documenting the tiny living movement, they've practically become tiny house encyclopedias. Their true passion is connecting people with the resources, inspiration, and connections they need to pursue their tiny home dreams. Alexis and Christian, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Thanks for having me.
Great. You're welcome. And welcome back to the show. You were episode 12.
Wow.
And now we're into the 170s, I think.
Oh, wow.
So, always love to have return guests because it means you're still doing what you're doing and helping people and kind of living the tiny dream.
Yeah, thanks. It's so crazy how many episodes you've done, which I love that so much because some of our favorite tiny people end up on your show.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think many of them were your suggestions at one point or the other, so always keep them coming. And now I want to kind of catch up because we have a lot to talk about. We have your new book, we have your Shuttle Bus, which you just dropped on me while we were talking before we started recording. But I just want to kind of start because, episode 12, that would put us into, I think that was probably the late spring or early summer of 18. So maybe could you catch us all up on what you've been up to since then in your tiny house life?
Not much.
Like so much.
Yeah.
Wow. 2018 was a really big year. We were traveling like crazy with the tiny house back then. And I guess now fall of 2019, we decided to try out home basing with our tiny house in Central Oregon, which we fell in love with and kept finding ourselves coming back or looking for opportunities to come back. And so we said, well, maybe we should try this out. And it's been fantastic. And we've had a really great run and a backyard, family backyard, which has been lovely. And so our idea was, okay, we love traveling, we love experiencing the movement up close and personal, but what's a way to do that that's maybe less gas mileage?
Yeah.
It also gives us a little bit more feeling of roots. After being nomads for 4.5 years, we were really desiring to have a little bit more connection with a single place. And so now we travel about 3 months out of the year.
Mm-hmm.
First with our Honda Element, which we turned into a camper, or I should say Christian turned into.
Yeah. So that was, so it turns our Honda Element into a camper, and we drove it for 3 months, and it was a little tight because it was us two and our puppy dog, and it was pretty tight. So
with all the camera gear like Tetris.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So randomly one day when we were walking through our neighborhood, noticed the shuttle bus was parked up the street at our neighbor's house, and asked him about it, and then totally forgot about it, And 6 months later, I decided to ask them if they'd be into selling it, and sure enough, they would. They were, and so we bought it, and so now we are proud owners of a 24 foot shuttle bus, 2000. What was it? 2003.
Yeah. And it's rustically functional right now.
Yeah. No.
Okay.
Basically no seats in the whole thing. So it's pretty much, ripped out, but we're able to make it work for us while we're traveling.
Yeah. But we have plans to fully convert it and make it comfy and cozy.
Yeah.
Home away from home / mobile studio.
Yeah. So it's slowly happening. Like I said.
Wait. So this is like the shuttle bus like you'd take at the airport?
Yeah, it's actually a Central Oregon, one of their city buses from here. So it actually didn't come from far away.
Yeah. So
nice.
Yeah, shuttling people across town.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's I'm smiling because there aren't very many people for whom going to a shuttle bus would be a gas mileage upgrade.
Double. I get double what I used to.
It's not fantastic, but it's better than the tiny house.
Oh God. Yeah.
Plus, when I interviewed you, Christian, about moving your tiny house, I think for the revised tiny house decisions, you basically were like, yeah, towing the tiny house, I'm basically like checking the mirrors all the time, basically white knuckling it like wherever you're going. And so now maybe you can be a little bit more relaxed while you drive.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. I definitely drive like a grandpa when I'm in this thing. It's like driving a big Cadillac. So it's just slow, and yeah, it's a lot easier.
Yeah. Yeah. So home basing, I like that. Was that an original term, or have you heard that in the tiny house movement before?
I don't know.
Good question. I'll own it. Yeah.
She comes up with stuff a lot.
Yeah, I like it. Home basing, copyrighted, Tiny House Expedition 2021. So you kind of mentioned that you were looking for more of a home base and feeling connection to one place. Is there anything that you were kind of surprised by, or that you weren't expecting about being in one place that you're either pleasantly surprised about or like, I kind of miss being on the road all the time?
Good question. We do get the travel itch sometimes, but I just love discovering new places in our town. I've really enjoyed exploring, and in ways that maybe when we traveled with the tiny house, we'd get a taste of a place, but we didn't really get the in-depth stuff. And I just find there's so much to learn about this place and people to meet, and having friends that you don't have to say goodbye to all the time is kind of nice too. Yeah. We're so fortunate in the nomad community to have so many great friends, but you don't get to see them that often.
Right.
So that's been a pleasant thing, is to call up a new friend and say, hey, you want to meet next Friday? And they're like, yeah, I'm in this town actually still with you. So that's
I live here.
Yeah. What about you, Christian?
Yeah, I like being able to, I don't know, find out more about the town, just being able to explore some of the restaurants and bars and things like that more. I mean, it's been hard this past year, but but that's slowly happening now. So yeah, and to be able to get on the bike and or one of our bicycles and ride around and explore that way too is really great.
But probably the best bit, I mean, okay, friends are probably the best, but besides friends, we live really close to a ski resort, so we snowboard all winter long.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
It's pretty dope.
That sounds great. And I've heard there are some good mountains there in Central Oregon.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, come on down.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's pretty good skiing here in Vermont, so it's hard to leave. But it's one of the reasons that I live here.
Yeah.
Well,
and it's one of the reasons
respect for that. Yeah.
Nice. So one thing that I've been curious about, and you're the perfect people to ask, is your tiny house as well as mine were built before Appendix Q, before there was really much legal regulations, and now the legalization efforts around the country are kind of honing in on, okay, your tiny house has to be built to a standard and maybe certified in order to be legally resided in. How has that affected your ability to find or did that affect your ability to find parking, and has it been an issue at all?
It hasn't been an issue for us in our many years of living tiny. There's one RV park that turned us away like 3 years ago in Portland, of all places, which is one of the most tiny friendly places now.
Yeah.
And we ended up just going to a park down the street. It's one of those things, like if we were certified, we would have appealed it, but we didn't.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, I think we just are very open and honest with potential hosts. Yeah. Like we have this great family that hosts us now, and, we tell them, what our situation is. If there's a gray zone, that we need to inform the neighbors and what the potential risks are, and if they're comfortable with that, and I think that's gone a long way for us personally. Down the road we might actually be able to get a permit for our tiny house in the not too distant future, which is kind of crazy. We'll see.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And is that something that's developing in Oregon?
Yes, there's a lot of action in Oregon, but we may be hoping to get some property. And in the county, you can permit an RV for like 6 month stays at a time.
Okay.
I'm still investigating this. So far, I haven't found that you can't just renew after the 6 months is up. And I'm not seeing any requirements besides the registration. So still investigating.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, that is the dream, to have some property. I guess if you have to move, you could move into the shuttle bus for the other 6 months and then back to the tiny house.
A workaround.
I like the workaround.
Yes, there's always a workaround. Well, I would say the thing that kind of tipped me over to like inviting you back on the show, not that I wouldn't have wanted you back on the show before, because much has happened, is your new book, which is called The Beginner's Guide to Tiny Houses: What You Need to Know About 400 Square Foot Living. Tell me the story of this book. How did this happen?
Good question. So we very fortunately got contacted by the publisher, I think at the end of last year. And the way this publisher works, they do a lot of data research about what people are interested in. And then they look for people who can write about it, which is great. And a benefit for us is they often work with a lot of first-time authors because they're looking for subject matter experts.
Right.
I guess we can humbly call ourselves that.
Yes, we are those.
I confirm. You don't even have to be humble.
Well, thank you so much. So that was how it got going, and they had a general outline in mind, and we made suggestions of editing that and things to cut, and then dedicated a pretty good chunk of, well, actually only an 8-week chunk of the winter writing the book. It was a pretty quick turnaround.
That is impressively fast. To talk to the publisher and write something and then I've kind of received a digital copy as a preview. I've gotten to see it and I'm really excited about it. When will this be something that our listeners can go out and, buy at their local bookstore?
Yeah, great question. So August 31st, it goes on sale on Amazon. Get a hard copy or a paper copy. The Kindle edition is now available. And then soon after that, it should be hitting bookstores. So stay tuned. Please go pre-order
a book. Pre-order it.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can pre-order it now.
Yep, and reserve your copy.
Awesome. Yeah. So who is the kind of intended audience for the book?
Well, it truly is meant for the beginner.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who's considering tiny living, is curious about whether it could be a good fit for them or not. They're the ideal person. But I have to say, we've been really delighted this week. Some of our early reviews are coming in.
Mm-hmm.
We've had, I think, 3 or 4 people who already live tiny, who've read the book.
Mm-hmm.
And one lady said, I read this book to see what I missed, basically. Are there things that I didn't know much about? And she said, yeah, actually, I learned a lot of new things in this book. And so that was really fantastic. And so I love that people who aren't beginners can get something out of it, because we don't just explore movable tiny houses, we explore stationary tiny houses,
mm-hmm.
and get into some legal stuff and downsizing tips. And Lord knows, I think even if you live tiny, like, always be downsizing,
Yeah. Always be downsizing. For sure. So it is, I agree with the reviews. I enjoyed looking through it, and I'm excited for you. I think that it's going to help people out.
Yeah.
That's
Thanks.
the goal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. I'll tell you, the hardest part of the book for us was figuring out the questionnaire in chapter 2. It's basically like a long form quiz.
Yeah, that took forever, didn't it?
Oh, so tough. Yeah. Is tiny living right for you? You're like, okay, what are the questions, the appropriate questions to ask?
Yeah.
That's one thing, to get to the essential, because you want to be super inclusive, because tiny living's right for everybody, all kinds of people,
mm-hmm.
but there's different forms of tiny living. There's different ways of getting there. So that was a real head scratcher.
Yeah.
For a while.
No, it's really cool. I didn't take it before our interview, but now I kind of want to see if tiny living's right for me. But like, it's cool because like the way you do it is that, you've got this pretty lengthy quiz. What is it, like 20 questions, 25 questions?
Something like that.
And then your answers are worth points, and like the lower your score is, the more tiny you are. The more ideally tiny you are.
Basically.
Yeah, we thought about that too. It was about the point system on it.
Yeah,
like the smaller should be the smaller, right? Yeah, let's do it that way.
Yeah, right. You're like that feels
that
right.
Makes sense.
And then it's like, is tiny living right for you right now? Is kind of the thing. It's like you don't want to roll it out for anybody, but we're firm believers in that tiny living is often right for a season of your life.
Uh-huh.
Some people make it a long-term thing, make it multiple seasons of their life. But so that's something to think about too, is, and some people, beyond the seasonal aspect of it, we get caught up in the fantasy,
mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
We love the pretty pictures of tiny homes. Who doesn't? We do. I get suckered by that stuff all the time. But where do they keep their dirty laundry? I mean, you got to get nitty gritty.
Yeah. Have you, speaking of which, so since you've been home basing now for 2 years, have you found that you've accumulated more stuff?
Good question. Yes, we have. Because as of now, we've got, what is it, like 3 e-bikes and 2 paddle boards and a handful of other
Mostly adventure stuff.
a
Yeah.
couple of things to go tubing down the river. We've definitely accumulated stuff.
Yeah, it's always the gear. Always the gear.
Yeah, always the gear. And our house is so small. We never, we didn't plan for those things. We didn't plan for that gear.
Right.
So we've managed to put, our host actually has a shed that we use for those things. So it helps.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes I think that the ideal tiny house for me, and it sounds like for you too, is like the tiny house that I already have, plus like a really big garage.
Yeah.
For like bicycles and skis and woodworking and like all that stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, I've in our property search, I've put the dream is to find something with just a garage on it.
Right. Forget the house.
Yeah.
Just send pictures of the garage.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, that's like, have you heard of the barn dominium kind of trend? I just heard about these recently. I'm like, that's brilliant. It's like you build a giant barn and then you build a tiny house inside of it, and then the rest of it is barn or garage.
I love those.
Yeah.
They're
that's great.
So cute. I'm like, I would want some soundproofing in the tiny house walls,
Yeah, totally. So in terms of tiny house expedition, like that, your YouTube channel, your online business, what have you been working on there other than the book, obviously?
Oh, a ton. This has been such an exciting period for us the last couple years. Man, it runs together, but of new projects and expansion. So our tiny house expedition videos are now on YouTube and on this great streaming channel /app called SHG Living.
Okay.
And it's like HGTV, but it's free subscription. They curate an incredible amount of DIY, home and garden content.
Nice.
So that's been fun to be a part of. And as they expand in the future, we might get to do an exclusive show for them. So that'd be super fun.
That'd be awesome.
Nice.
And in addition to that, thanks to our great friends and tiny house movement legends, Andrew and Gabriella Morrison, we now run Tiny House Build and tinyhouseplans.com.
Amazing. I cannot imagine running 3 websites. One is like enough for me.
Yeah. There's a lot of questions. A lot of questions.
I feel you. We've been so thrilled that we hired a virtual assistant. Well, she's more, I feel like virtual assistant isn't enough for her. I need a new term, but she's helped us with tiny house plans, some work around that, which is great because it's like you want to do it justice and it's a lot for, us.
Totally. And how is tiny house plans going? I mean, I feel like people are so interested in custom plans if they're DIYing their tiny house. Are people still buying like pre-made plans?
They really are. There's been it's been interesting in the pandemic, kind of some ebbs and flows.
Yeah, it's been really funny. I feel like some people in the beginning of the pandemic, well, maybe a little after the beginning of the pandemic, pulled the trigger.
Yeah,
they pulled the trigger on doing their tiny house. So they bought plans and started pushing forward.
And there's been other times where, as the news has gotten worse, I feel like people pull back. And this is just our story we're making up about it. Right. But it's just, there's so much happening in the world. But we're thrilled as we have 2 new sets of plans from contributing designers. One's called Tiny House. It's like TYNY House. Yep. Architectural tiny house from Australia.
Okay.
Beautiful design with this epic picture window that's basically an entire wall.
It's like the whole end of the house. It's really, really cool.
Very modern, but still cozy. And the other is called H2H 2-bedroom tiny house. Ooh. What makes this super special is it has 2 bedrooms, but they're both accessed by stairs and they both have doors.
Ooh.
So
very different.
if you got kids, think about
doors.
this.
They need doors. You need doors.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And that one, of course, was designed by this wonderful single mom. Well, she's no longer single, but
still a mom.
Shalina. Gosh, her last name just popped on my head. It will come to me. I'm sorry, Shalina. She's amazing, and she was in a big life transition, and she was trying to figure out something for her and her daughter. And she has background in design and came up with a stunning home.
Awesome. Yeah, I looked. It's Shalina Kessman.
Thank you.
And we'll link to both of these plan sets from the show notes page, which I'll tell people after we're done recording, so people can find the H2H and the tiny. I know it's tiny, but I like saying tiny.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Well, that's all fantastic. I was also just thinking, can you talk about, are you still involved with Thea?
Yeah. So Thea, Tiny Home Industry Association.
Mm-hmm.
I sit on the board. He's board adjacent.
All right.
And I'm part of the communications committee. And for a while, I was communications director, which was a volunteer position, and was really trying to get some big initiatives underway. I've gratefully passed the baton of a lot of the big efforts to Lindsay Wood from Experience Tiny Homes. And she's the first paid employee, which is fantastic. And that means our professional association is taking it up to the next level.
Nice.
But one of the things I'm helping launch right now soon is a new website for Thea, which I'm really excited about.
That's great. Yeah, and Thea's website has always been like a great resource in terms of just wanting to figure out, hey, what are the laws in my state? You can just go there and find out.
Yeah, thank you. We've had some really great contributors in the past, and we're excited to improve that offering and to make it more searchable and user-friendly for folks. And, it's been, we've been advocates for a long time, so it's been fun to help rally behind some big efforts, because there's a lot of advocacy coming. Dan Fitzpatrick is the man out there, and besides things that he does, that he leads personally, we are partnered with a lot of local groups and try to give them the tools they need to be effective in their home turf. Totally.
Well, maybe I know there's been some big news. I think the last big splash that I saw was Maine. Could you give us a rundown maybe of like what exciting tiny house legalization things have happened like this year in 2021?
Yeah, it's been a big year.
And I'm sorry, I'm interrupting because like I'm just like, you are an encyclopedia. It's true. I'm just like kind of grilling you here. I hope you don't mind. But yeah, tell me about the things that are exciting that have happened in 2021.
No problem. Happy to do it. And this is why I have so many facts in my head. Sometimes that's why I forget people's parts of people's names. But yeah, 2021 legalization victories. Number one, the Maine state bill. This is huge. It says that a movable tiny home, a tiny house on wheels, can be allowed anywhere a single family home is allowed, or an ADU, foundation-based ADU. Now, that doesn't mean you can put them wherever you want starting today, but what it does do is it takes a lot of the work out for the local municipalities who all are like, what do I do with tiny houses? Well, now you can say the state told you what you can do with them. So why don't we just hurry this up? And what's great is there are already a couple cities who said, okay, great, thanks state, we're doing it. And so I think we're going to see more of that there. And that's huge. Because expediting, that's what we need. And that's what I love about that. Portland, Oregon has been known as tiny friendly for a long time, but what people might not realize is for the last couple of years, it's been a very temporary thing. There was an emergency housing ordinance that said tiny houses and RVs could be on private property with these minimal restrictions, but it was going to sunset this year. And advocates, Cole Peterson was a big one, helped to rally some support. We submitted testimony, and now you can get an RV or tiny house on wheels permitted on a private property with very minimal restrictions. Like, you don't even have to be certified. They say, yeah, hook up the sewer if you have a bathroom. If not, you can use the main house. But they also said, we know it's expensive, so here's a grant program for some people who might struggle to pay that few $1,000 bill. So that's so epic. And because what they did is so people got wise, and they said, okay, if we're going to talk the talk about having more shelter and housing options, then why don't we make it as easy as possible? And that's what I love about this. And Oakland, California is looking to follow in their footsteps with something very similar.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I haven't been in Portland, obviously, since the pandemic started, but those cities on the West Coast that have temperate climates also tend to have just so many problems with homelessness. And it is wonderful to see cities like actually starting to try to make it easier for people to live in tiny houses. Not that that's the Band-Aid solution for everything, but it certainly can take the pressure off.
Yeah, we completely agree. I mean, we're just pro option.
Yeah.
Period. One of our favorite nonprofits in the movement, Square One Villages, they just opened a new permanently affordable co-op tiny home village in Cottage Grove, Oregon. And this is a rural model to something they did in Eugene, which is a more urban environment.
Yeah.
So I just love them so much. They're like, okay, we see all these big problems in the shelter to housing continuum, and we're going to give you an example for each one.
Yeah, I had Amanda Dellinger on the show, it was a few months ago, and they do community relations for Square One, and I just was blown away because I didn't really know how much they were doing. It just I feel like the idea of creating tiny houses like that, in my mind, it would be this long, slow process of raising money and figuring out, and they're just boom, 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 tiny house village here, another one over there. It's amazing.
They're amazing.
Yeah, they are amazing.
That's the word.
And it helps that they're an organization that's been around for a long time. So,
right.
That helps a hell of a lot.
Absolutely.
And one thing during the pandemic, as it should be, anytime, but there's been an explosion of tiny home shelter villages and projects.
Yeah.
So that's great. And that's nationwide.
Yeah. And hopefully those won't just go away after the pandemic, because they certainly are needed.
Yeah, seriously. It's the problem's not going away. And gosh, in so many places, the cost of housing has just gone up during this time. And that's a big thing I think a lot of folks don't realize, is that it's so easy to fall into homelessness, but it's very difficult to come out because, there are programs, but they're limited. And if you don't qualify, or if you can't get in, coming up with first month's, last month's and security, it's a tall order for anybody.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, is there any other exciting projects that you can let us in on that you're working on?
What can we let you in on? Good question.
Not too much.
I get a couple little things. One is we're about to go to a super fun event with our shuttle bus.
Mm-hmm.
You want to tell them about that?
Mm-hmm. It's called Gutted.
Okay.
It's in southern part of Colorado, and the premise is it's like a couple of different things. I mean, it's like going to an event, but the gutted part of it is it's a competition where they're taking a bus, an RV, and a van, and they're completely gutted, and they're going to have teams of, I think it's like 6 people that are going to build something over the 5 days, over the week, inside each one of them, and be judged on what they did. So they actually asked us to be part of it, to be in the competition, but I was like, I'm not up for driving all that way and then, really working hard for 5 days right as we get there. I want to go and hang out for once, because we've worked almost every single show we've been to. So, we have worked every, but we're going to go, and we're going to be on a couple of panels and do some talks. But other than that, I enjoy doing that.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
Cool. That sounds really fun.
And it's open to the public. If anyone can make it to Southern Colorado, come out, do yoga, do workshops, learn about converting a rig, or bring a tent, bring a car, whatever you got.
Yep.
Very cool. Very cool. Anything else before I let you go?
Well, one last thing is, you may remember this documentary series called Living Tiny Legally.
Yes.
And we've been promising a part 3. And of course, the pandemic slowed us down.
Yeah.
But I will say we purposely went really slow on this one because we want this to be all about implementation. So we want to show the permanent tiny homes in villages and backyards. So we're going to be doing some pretty key follow-ups over the coming months, including Lake Dallas Tiny Home Village. And so really stoked on that, and a couple others. So I can't promise any dates, but like we're probably 2022.
All right.
The end of 20.
And all this, and in the meantime, you still put out a YouTube video every week somehow.
Yeah. And every once in a while, we might throw one out on a Tuesday just for the hell of it.
Just for the hell of it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm amazed. I'm in awe of both of you, and I just thank you for all the work you're doing and for coming back onto the Tiny House Lifestyle podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much to Alexis and Christian of Tiny House Expedition for being guests on the show today. You can find the show notes, including a link to the beginner's guide to tiny houses and the specific tiny house plans that we talked about, at thetinyhouse.net/177. Again, that's thetinyhouse.net/177. Well, that's all for this week. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and I'll be back next week with another episode of the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast.